Welcome back to the CRP. This is Devin. It is Wednesday, September the 4th, 2019, and this is a CRP News Roundup. Now, on Monday, when I did my News Roundup, I did an extensive preview of UFC 242 this Saturday in Abu Dhabi, headlined by a UFC lightweight title bout between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Dustin the Diamond Poirier. And during fight week, we all get excited. We all... hardcore MMA fans tend to tune in to the UFC Embedded series and the countdown shows that are on the UFC's YouTube page. I highly recommend going and checking them out. There's a lot of hype going on, and that's really always the center focus when there's a big pay-per-view coming up in the weekend, is all the attention is shifted toward that one event during that week. But in the backdrop, there's still some news dropping, and this week is no different. And here it is Wednesday, and I have to get to some of these headlines. And I don't think there's any place that we can start that would make more sense than starting right here with this MMA fighting headline. Former UFC champion Chris Cyborg signs with Bellator MMA. Now, it was a very, very publicized feud over the past couple months that has been going on with Chris Cyborg and the UFC. Chris Cyborg resurrected old video clips of Joe Rogan laughing about her having a penis, and old video clip of Dana White saying that she looked like Vanderlei Silva in a dress and heels at the MMA Awards. And there was a big fallout, big negotiation. Dana White's coming out saying that she really just, what it is she doesn't want to fight Amanda Nunes, so she's out here making this kind of a spectacle and creating this kind of drama that's really not organic. It's really not real. It's not really something that's going on. There's not really this friction on the UFC's part, is Dana's claim. That they support Chris Cyborg, that they've bent over backwards to accommodate her and to promote her, and that what it's really all about is she's wanting to exit the UFC, get easier fights, and get herself a big deal as an independent free agent. And that's exactly what she got. I'm not going to sit and say that I agree with Dana White's claims, but nevertheless, Chris Cyborg obviously wants to part ways with the UFC. The Amanda Nunes rematch wasn't enough to seduce her into signing another contract to stay. She has been vocal in saying that she wanted basically to sign a one fight contract to fight Amanda Nunes, and the UFC wanted no part of that. And nevertheless, flash forward, and we get her signing with Bellator, which sets up, I think, a very interesting featherweight title rematch in Bellator with current UFC women's featherweight champion Julia Budd. But let's look into this article a little bit. It says right here at the beginning, Chris Cyborg has ended her free agency. The former UFC featherweight champion has inked a deal to join the roster at Bellator MMA, where she will team up with her former Strikeforce promoter Scott Coker again. The Bellator president made the announcement on Tuesday while stating that she inked the biggest contract in women's MMA history. Now, I don't know the details of this contract, but that is Scott Coker's claim, that she is now underneath the biggest contract that any woman fighter has ever had for MMA. And it says very clearly into this article that they are pretty much already just announcing. They might as well just did a 1-2 punch and just announced she signed with Bellator and we're going to put her against Julia Budd, because it mentions it very much in here. Cyborg is the most dominant female fighter in history of the sport, and she will be a perfect fit here at Bellator, where champion Julia Budd and the other women that make up the best female featherweight division in the world have eagerly awaited her arrival. Yeah, I'm sure that they're eagerly awaiting to fight Chris Cyborg. And, then it goes into just her resume in the UFC, just talking about her UFC tenure, where she came in, her first bout with the promotion was back in 2016 when she fought Leslie Smith, and then she fought Lena Landsberg, Tanya Evinger, and Holly Holm. She actually won the vacant UFC featherweight title in her fight with Tanya Evinger after they stripped Jermaine de Randamie for refusing to fight Chris Cyborg. She defended her belt twice before being notoriously and infamously knocked out in 51 seconds by Amanda Nunes, and then comes off her decision win over Felicia Spencer back at UFC 240 just a few months ago. Now she's parting ways and heading to Bellator, where a bout with Julia Budd will be very interesting to see, because Julia Budd's on a very good run and is a very good fighter. She's 13-2 overall. She's 36 years old. And she hasn't lost a fight since she lost to a first-round armbar to Ronda Rousey back in 2011, back in the Strikeforce days. Her only two losses on her resume were in the year of 2011 in Strikeforce to none other than Ronda Rousey and Amanda Nunes. You may have heard of those two. So I think that we're going to probably be seeing Chris Cyborg and Julia Budd by the end of the year. I think that's a very good fight and a very good. This is a good pickup for Bellator. Bellator's expanding their women's MMA roster. I think they've had a very good year with a lot of good fights. I've really enjoyed their Grand Prix tournaments. So Bellator's doing some good things, and they picked up a good acquisition. With picking up Chris Cyborg. And moving on from here, BJ Penn. Here's an article from MMA Junkie. I covered on Monday BJ Penn's altercation in some street fight outside of a bar in Hawaii where he got knocked clean out, and covered about the TMZ video and all this. But he's broke his silence, and here it is, a headline from MMA Junkie. BJ Penn denies starting street fight, caught on video, addresses domestic abuse allegations. And let's just look into this article. UFC Hall of Famer BJ Penn has broken his silence about a pair of video, showing a street fight he was involved in, expressing regret for his role while denying he was completely at fault. Penn echoed the sentiments of a longtime family representative who previously told MMA Junkie that Penn was trying to calm an angry acquaintance outside a bar on Hawaii's Big Island when he was repeatedly struck and knocked down. Penn said that was when his adrenaline kicked up and he defended himself. This is Penn's own words here. He says that the last thing I'm trying to do is get into a fight. Penn told TSN's Aaron Bronstetter in an interview released Wednesday, "I'm an older guy too, and I just wanted to enjoy life. I'm thinking today driving around, why don't I have two bodyguards on the side of me at all times, just making sure it's impossible to get into any trouble." And it goes on to talk about penciled in for his final UFC fight later this year against Nick Lynch, which I think is just insane and exploitive and purposeless that they're even doing that, but they are. Penn's on a notoriously epic losing streak. Clearly not mentally stable, and they're really going to sign him for another fight against a man who literally hates him. Penn also addressed allegations of domestic violence raised earlier this year by the mother of his children, claiming that they were a ploy to gain custody of their $2. "Girls are soft, cuddly creatures. I have two little girls myself," Penn said. "If anyone did anything to them, then you'd see me on TMZ again. I'm sure I'm addicted to fighting and working out and getting into tussles with men. But she's doing what she thinks she can to do to get the kids up to California. That's her and her husband's game plan. So let them do that." So he's coming out saying that he was trying to break up a fight. He was getting hit and tried to defend himself, got knocked out. He had no intention of getting in a street fight. And that the whole domestic abuse allegations are just all a ploy to get custody of his kids from his ex-wife. So not taking any responsibility, justifying the behavior, justifying these allegations. And I'm not going to sit here and say I know the truth of what's going on in this man's personal life. So I'm not going to do that. But I do think BJ needs some help. And I definitely don't think he needs to be fighting in the UFC. Moving on from here, here's another article from MMA Junkie. Tony Ferguson calls for December showdown with UFC 242 title winner. If you don't know who he's talking about there, he's talking about Khabib and Dustin, obviously. And this was in an interview that he did earlier this week on Ariel Helwani's MMA show on ESPN. Reading into this article, Tony Ferguson hopes Dustin Poirier gets a piece of Khabib Nurmagomedov and puts him away at UFC 242 to set up a good old American battle royale in December. The ex-interim UFC lightweight champion stumped for a fight against the winner of the September 7th title unifier, saying he's earned it with a 12-fight win streak. I don't think anybody denies that. He is by far, the fact that this man is 15-1 in the UFC, one of the most exciting fighters the sport's ever seen, and has just been so dominant for so long, 12-fight win streak, and has still, to this day, never fought for an undisputed title, is just insane. Ferguson indicated a preference toward facing the current interim lightweight champion, but he also welcomed a long-awaited showdown with undisputed title holder Nurmagomedov, whom he's been scheduled to fight on 4 occasions at the end of the year. And yeah, that's what's just so amazing about the Khabib and Tony fight. And if Khabib gets through Dustin, I think that sets up maybe the biggest and most important fight in UFC history, MMA history at that. I know that's a strong statement, but when we look at this is notoriously for a long time been considered the most talent-rich, talent-packed division in the sport. And here you have 2 men who have literally cleared out the entire division, have been set up to fight 4 different times. Every time it falls through, whether it's a last-second weight issue on Khabib's part or Tony tripping over a wire a week before the fight, every time it happens and it gets delayed by some freak accident or some unfortunate occurrence, every time it gets better. Every time the fight gets better. It gets more important. It gets more necessary to happen and gets more exciting to happen. And I can't. The thought of them actually getting in the cage and fighting is just is very exciting to me. And there's been a lot of talk about Conor McGregor, and Dana's made it very clear that he's interested in a rematch with Tony with Khabib and Conor. And I'm sure he is. That's big money, but they got to do something with Tony Ferguson. And if they're not going to give Tony the winner of this fight, which I think they obviously should, I think December's a good time frame for it, then they need to make Tony versus Conor. If they want Conor to fight Khabib after this, if Khabib gets through Dustin, then they got to do something with Tony. Then they need to at least make Conor earn it and put him in there with Tony. I think what's more likely is I think Conor's probably going to end up looking at the winner of Cerrone and Gaethje, and I think Tony will get the winner of this. I think December is a good time frame. And my last report of the day is another MMA fighting headline here from their morning report, that Frankie Edgar to Conor McGregor, stop faking the funk, don't just say it, let's follow through on it. And Conor McGregor, on his sit-down interview with Ariel Helwani a few weeks ago, listed a plethora of the who's who of MMA for a potential fight for him coming back, and he listed everything from a Khabib rematch, Dustin Poirier, Tony Ferguson, Max Holloway, Jose Aldo rematch. He mentioned Nate Diaz. He mentioned George Masvidal, and he also mentioned Frankie Edgar, because they were supposed to fight back in the day. But Frankie Edgar just lost another 145 featherweight title fight, and has been talking about, and came out just about a month ago saying he's going to drop down to 135 finally, and now he's coming out. I mean, that just shows just how much of a draw and how much of a big fight that Conor McGregor still is. That guys just literally clamor for it still. And I think Frankie needs to just go ahead and go down to 135. I think a fight with Cejudo, I think that's a fight he can win. I think he could become a 35 champion. I know he's nearing 40, but Frankie's always been one of the best fighters in the world. And I think that he has always been a natural 135er, and actually has been a champion at 55, multiple-time title challenger at 145 pounds. I think it's time for him to go down to 35 before he calls it quits, and I don't think he's going to get the Conor rematch. I think Conor's going to be looking at other options. And so I think this is just a lot of hot air, and just Frankie heard his name, got excited, and is now wanting to take to the airwaves and say, hey, I'm in. Got his hand raised, but I think he was the last person that Conor named, and I think that there's a reason for that. This has been a CRP News Roundup. Stay tuned. We're going to have more coverage. Stay tuned to the CRP. We're going to have a full-length podcast. We're going to have a lot more conversation later on this week leading up to the big UFC 242 event this Saturday.